It was a morning drenched in heartbreak, the kind of pain that steals the breath from your lungs and leaves the world spinning. A mother's voice, raw and trembling, cut through the air like a blade. "Where is my child? Please, just tell me where my baby is." Her words carried the weight of a desperate hope, a hope that shattered with a single devastating truth. Livye Lewis was gone. Livye wasn't just a daughter. She was a light in the lives of everyone who knew her. She had an unshakable passion for helping others, a tenderness that led her to pursue nursing, so she could stand by people in their most vulnerable moments. Her mother's heart ached with memories of Livye's infectious kindness, a love so profound that the void left in her absence felt impossible to comprehend. But the circumstances of her death were even harder to accept. Authorities found Livye in a car, lifeless. The scene, surreal and haunting, offered more questions than answers. Nearby, another figure entered the story, Matthew Edgar. Curled into the fetal position behind the vehicle, his presence turned the tragedy into an enigma. The timeline was a blur. At dawn, the sheriff called investigators to the hospital, urging them to sit with Matthew. His story was riddled with confusion, claims of drinking on his porch the night before, followed by an inexplicable gap in memory until he woke up in the back of an ambulance. He couldn't explain why he was at the scene, why his face was smeared with blood, or how a rifle, a pair of shoes, and a hat came to be scattered nearby. Detectives pressed him for answers. His reactions? A troubling mix of vague recollections and what one investigator described as forced crying. Dry sobs without a single tear. Suspicion tightened its grip, and one question echoed louder than the rest. Did Matthew Edgar kill Livye Lewis? The evidence was murky, a puzzle with missing pieces. Forensic results raised unsettling possibilities. The rifle bore no fingerprints or DNA, and traces from another man were found on Livye. But the lack of clarity didn't dim one investigator's resolve. "I have no doubt," they declared. "Matthew Edgar killed Miss Lewis." Theories abounded, some pointing to another individual possibly involved that night, but none offered the answers the world so desperately sought. Public opinion was fierce and unforgiving. Most believed Matthew was guilty. Whether he acted alone or not, the tragedy left a family shattered and a community reeling from the loss of someone so pure and selfless. Livye's story became a haunting question mark, a tale of love and light extinguished by darkness. It's a wound that will never heal, a mystery that continues to haunt those left behind, and a stark reminder of how quickly life can change forever. In the pre-dawn hours of Halloween 2020, a day steeped in shadows and superstition, tragedy struck Hemphill, Texas, a town where everyone knows everyone and secrets are hard to keep. Livye Lewis, just 19 years old, was found slumped over the steering wheel of her car, a single rifle shot to her neck ending a life full of promise. Her identity was confirmed, but the news reached her mother, Darcy Bass, in the most heartbreaking way, through a friend's phone call. "Isn't that Darcy Bass's daughter?" whispered neighbors as the tragedy rippled through the tight-knit community of just over 1,000 people. Darcy, gripped by panic, resolved to see her daughter. "I'm going to see my child," she insisted, clinging to the faint hope that Livye was still alive. But when she arrived, her worst fears became reality. Livye was gone. Overwhelmed by grief, Darcy's world shattered in an instant. Livye wasn't just a daughter. She was a bright, determined young woman. A straight-A student and scholarship recipient, she had dreams of becoming a nurse and, eventually, a physician's assistant. Even as a teenager, she was already working as a certified nursing assistant at a local nursing home, where residents adored her. She was amazing at it, said her best friend, Taylor Barnett. "That's a tough job, but Livye made it look easy." She loved it. Livye's warmth and maturity left a lasting impression on everyone who knew her, including Taylor, who described their bond as inseparable. "If you saw Livye, you saw me," Taylor said. But Livye's grounded nature also made her vulnerable in ways she couldn't foresee. During her senior year of high school, she became entangled in a secret relationship with Matthew Edgar, a 23-year-old married man with 2 young sons. The relationship began quietly in November 2019, their first exchanges revealed through text messages. "You do realize you cannot say a word to anybody that we are even texting LOL," Matthew wrote. Livye's discomfort was clear. "Obviously, I'm not going to brag about texting a married man, but thanks for the clarification. It didn't take long for Livy to end the affair, but Matthew's interest in her didn't wane. Months later, he reached out again, venting about his failing marriage. I cheated again, he admitted. Livy, firm in her convictions, replied, I'm not really down for being a homewrecker. Matthew's marriage eventually fell apart, and shortly after, he moved back into Livy's life. At just 18, she found herself navigating a complicated and volatile relationship with a man burdened by 2 young children and a messy divorce. Tensions flared between Livy and Matthew's ex-wife, Montana Bokel. What began as jealousy soon evolved into a surprising shift. Montana extended a hand of friendship to Livy. In Livy's eyes, she thought she had a friend, Taylor explained. But others weren't so sure. In Montana's eyes, I think she was jealous, Taylor said. Sometimes people get close to others with ulterior motives. The tangled web of relationships, Matthew, Livy, Montana, became a dangerous love triangle, one simmering with tension and mistrust. When questioned by Sabine County Sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough about his relationships, Matthew's response was disturbingly indifferent. It's awesome. But there was nothing awesome about what followed. A storm of emotions, betrayals, and unanswered questions that culminated in the tragedy that cost Livye Lewis her life. Matthew Edgar described his relationships with Livye Lewis and his ex-wife, Montana Bokel, with unsettling nonchalance. It's awesome, he said, claiming Livy and Montana had grown to be big buddies. But his casual words masked a far darker reality. He had warned Livy, you can get along with her for the children, but don't be too close with her. Beneath his assurances, a sinister pattern was emerging. Livy's best friend, Taylor Barnett, saw it firsthand. He was abusive in more ways than one, Taylor revealed. When Livy and Matthew briefly stayed at Taylor's house, his drunken outbursts and aggression became impossible to ignore. It got so bad I didn't want him there anymore, she said, describing a volatile man whose behavior grew more alarming by the day. Text messages between Matthew and Livy unveiled the turbulence of their relationship. While Matthew occasionally sent tender messages like, "Good night, baby, I love you," Livy's replies painted a starkly different picture. "I don't know why you keep putting your hands on me like that," she wrote. "My body hurts today." Friends believed Livy clung to the hope that Matthew could change, even as she endured his abuse. Instead of starting her new life at college in the summer of 2020, Livy chose to stay behind to care for Matthew and his sons. She poured her heart into creating a home for them, redecorating the boys' rooms with cheerful baseball and soccer themes. But no amount of love or effort could change Matthew. By August, Livy's fear was impossible to suppress. "I want to be in our home with you, but I can't do the way you act when you drink," she texted. "I'm scared of you. You've laid your hands on me multiple times. I deserve better than that." Livy kept her suffering hidden from her family, protecting them from the truth. "She probably figured I'd do something crazy," her mother, Darcy Bass, admitted. But Livy confided in her cousin, Sydney Ebar, sending her a chilling photo of a busted nose, a silent plea for someone to understand the depths of her pain. As Livy tried to navigate her fraught relationship, she was blindsided by yet another betrayal. On her birthday, October 4th, 2020, Matthew's texts revealed he had been cheating on her. Montana. "I didn't cheat on Livy with multiple women, just you LOL," he texted Montana, twisting the knife further. The revelation only deepened Livy's isolation in an already toxic situation. Sydney, desperate to protect Livy, tried to warn her of the danger. "You know it gets worse," she said. Livy's response was heartbreaking in its resignation. "I know." Despite the escalating violence and betrayal, Livy finally broke up with Matthew. But in the small, suffocating town of Hemphill, escape was impossible. On Halloween morning, 2020, Livy and Matthew's lives collided one last time, setting the stage for a tragedy that would leave a permanent scar on their community. The morning Livye Lewis was found dead, her ex-boyfriend, Matthew Edgar, woke up in a hospital bed, dazed and disoriented. Blood stained his face, yet he bore no injuries. When asked how he got there, his answer was chillingly simple. "I have no clue." Sabine County Sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough pressed him. "How much had you been drinking?" Matthew's response was a grim admission. "Bottle of Jim Beam. A few beers earlier." He claimed the night began at a party at his friend Bobby Ozan's house, where he last saw Livy. "She heard my name was okay," he mumbled, before recounting how he left Bobby's, went home, and blacked out. But McDonough wasn't convinced. You don't know how you ended up on the ground behind the car with the dead girl. Matthew's silence spoke louder than words. The scene where Livy was found haunted McDonough's mind. Her lifeless body in her car, a rifle discarded nearby, and Matthew curled up in a fetal position just feet away. Blood on his face. No injuries. No explanation. As McDonough swabbed Matthew's blood for DNA testing and collected his clothes, the weight of the situation pressed down. Finally, he delivered the words that would change everything. I'm placing you under arrest. The charge is homicide. Matthew's reaction was unsettling. No protests. No denials. Just emptiness. Nothing at all, he murmured, his voice devoid of emotion. With Matthew behind bars, McDonough had 90 days to uncover the truth. 90 days to present enough evidence to indict him or let him go. To meet the deadline, he enlisted the Texas Rangers. But as the investigation unfolded, Matthew's guilt wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. Sean Dunn, a former deputy sheriff and close friend of Matthew's, painted a different picture. I know Matthew. He's a hard worker. He loved his family. I don't believe he did this, Sean insisted. He even vouched for Matthew's reaction upon hearing Livy was dead. When they told him her name, it hit him hard. That was real. Still, the doubts lingered. If Matthew didn't kill Livy, who did? Behind the scenes, whispers of another suspect grew louder. During a recorded jailhouse phone call, Matthew's mother, Cindy, voiced a chilling theory. If it turns out Montana did this, I don't want to talk about it. Please. Her voice trembled as she added, it's not going to make you want to hurt her because she killed the woman you loved? Matthew's response was as uncertain as everything else about that night. I don't know, he said quietly. Despite mounting suspicions, the truth remained elusive. Sheriff McDonough couldn't close the case. There are plenty of other people who could be involved, he admitted. The investigation was far from over, the answers buried beneath layers of lies, fear, and heartbreak. In Hemp Hill, the small town rocked by Livy's death, the question burned unanswered. Who killed Livye Lewis? Montana's strange friendship with Livy raised more questions than it answered. My husband left me for this woman, but she's my best friend, Montana said, her voice heavy with contradiction. Even she couldn't explain it. Investigators uncovered a chilling detail. One of the last photos of Livy showed her at a party that night, standing beside Montana. Matthew Edgar was also at Bobby Ozan's house that evening, but he was on the outside looking in. Livy and Montana mingled, laughing and chatting with everyone but him. When Matthew tried to approach, they ignored him. The dynamic was impossible to miss. Matthew wasn't over Livy, even though she had ended things weeks earlier. According to Bobby, Matthew's hurt was palpable. She doesn't want anything to do with him anymore, Bobby said. She's moved on, like he doesn't exist. But Matthew couldn't let go. He drank heavily that night, his agitation growing with every passing hour. As the party wound down, Matthew claimed he went home. You left Bobby's and went to your house, investigators asked. Went home, he muttered. But beyond that, his memory was blank. Montana's account, however, painted a darker picture. She told investigators Matthew had overheard Livy say she planned to stay overnight at Bobby's house. You think he heard her? They asked. Oh, I know he did, Montana replied. That's what set him off. For Matthew, it wasn't just an innocent sleepover. To him, it meant betrayal. That meant she was going to sleep with Bobby, Montana explained. It was too much for him. His rage exploded. Montana described how Matthew turned his fury on her. He tried to choke me, she said, her voice trembling. Desperate, she ran for help. Bobby intervened, pinning Matthew against a car to stop the escalating violence. But Matthew was uncontrollable, screaming, I'm going to kill y'all. I'm going to kill y'all. Fearing for their lives, Montana and Livy left in separate cars. Montana drove toward the safety of Matthew's family's property, hoping someone would intervene. But Matthew followed close behind. When she pulled into the driveway, he was right there. I went to get out of the car, and he came at me again, Montana said. Terrified, she began honking the horn, hoping someone inside would hear. Our kids were in the back seat of his van, she said. I was honking and screaming, trying to get help. Eventually, Matthew stormed off to his own house nearby, leaving Montana and Livy momentarily safe, but shaken to their core. That night, the thin veneer of civility shattered, revealing the true danger lurking beneath their tangled relationships. As the chaos subsided, one thing was clear: this wasn't over. The storm brewing in Matthew's mind was far from spent, and tragedy was just around the corner. A terrified Montana sought refuge at Matthew's mother's house after the chaos of the night, hoping the worst was over. But Matthew wasn't finished. As the night deepened, her phone lit up with chilling texts from him. "You took part in it, and you're guilty as she is," he wrote, accusing Montana of enabling Livye's decision to stay with Bobby Ozan. The venom in his words was unmistakable. "You knew what was going on," he continued. Then came the threat that made her blood run cold. "I will take your life, her life, and his life, mark my words." At 3:22 a.m., Matthew sent another message. "I'm leaving, better get here and get your kids." Drunk, furious, and armed, Matthew climbed into his truck, rifle at his side, and set out. Investigators believe Livye pulled over to talk to him, unaware of the danger she was in. She wasn't afraid, investigator McDonough explained. She was sitting with her legs crossed, not ready to run. To some degree, she felt safe with him. 12 minutes later, Matthew sent another text: "I'm home." "I got Livye's keys and her phone." Montana's anxiety spiked as she replied, "Where is she?" Matthew's response was a gut punch: "Dead." Montana didn't call 911. She claimed she didn't believe him, brushing off the horrific statement as drunken rambling. Instead, she asked, "Can I come down there?" His answer: "Yeah." She later told investigators that Matthew's mother wouldn't let her leave, so she fell asleep, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding. But Matthew wasn't done. Sometime after sending that haunting text, he returned to the scene of the crime, this time in his cousin Zach's truck. It was parked behind Livye's car, leaving investigators with a question that lingered. Why would he go back? Montana's inaction haunted Livye's friends. She knew who he was, Bailey, a close friend of Livye, said. "Those texts? That's not something you ignore. You call the police." Investigators couldn't shake their doubts about Montana. Did she know more? Was she involved? A polygraph test added to their suspicions. Asked if she was covering for Matthew, she failed. "There's something you're not telling us," the examiners insisted. Still, after exhaustive investigations, Montana was cleared. She hadn't been to the crime scene. She hadn't helped cover up Livye's murder. "To those who think she's involved," McDonough said, "it's simply not true. All the evidence pointed to one person, Matthew Edgar. The motive was as old as time: jealousy. His fury, his inability to let go, had driven him to a moment of unspeakable violence. And now, that rage had destroyed more lives than just his own. In February 2021, the COVID pandemic brought the justice system to a halt, delaying countless trials, including the case against Matthew Edgar. With no grand juries convening, the system forced a judge to release him on bond, an unthinkable decision for Livye's loved ones. The bond, set at a mere $50,000, felt like a slap in the face. "It was insane to me," Darcy, Livye's devastated mother, said. The message was clear: the system had failed them. Not long after his release, Darcy found herself face to face with Matthew at a local convenience store. Seeing the man accused of killing her daughter sent her into a rage. "I just lost it," she said. "I threw whatever I could grab and went for him, screaming, 'You killed my daughter.'" Instead of remorse or acknowledgement, Matthew retaliated by pressing charges against her. Though the charges were later dropped, Darcy wasn't after revenge. She was desperate for answers. "She loved you," Darcy said, her voice breaking. "She was good to you, your kids, your family. How could you do this?" By March 16, 2021, a grand jury finally indicted Matthew for Livye's murder, but the wheels of justice turned slowly. Out on bail, Matthew continued to torment Livye's family with his freedom. Darcy, now armed with the truth, clung to the hope that the trial would bring the justice Livye deserved. When asked what stood out most in the evidence against Matthew, Darcy didn't hesitate. "From his threats to kill her, to being at the scene, to it being his gun," she said. But it was Matthew's own chilling words that cemented his guilt. When he texted, "She's dead," who else would know that but the person who killed her? Key evidence unraveled Matthew's lies. Livye's phone was found in the truck he drove to the scene, her keys discovered in his grandparents' driveway. Darcy revealed that Matthew's mother, Cindy Hogan, had reluctantly handed over the keys and attempted to spin an outlandish story. Cindy claimed a drug cartel had staged Livye's death, framing Matthew over a $330,000 debt. Darcy dismissed the theory without pause. "It's a ridiculous fairy tale," she said. "A desperate distraction from the truth." The trial began on January 24, 2022. Matthew, still out on bond, walked into court each day as though he were a free man, the image only broken by the bulletproof vest he wore during testimony. Security was tight, reflecting the tension that gripped the county. The prosecution's case centered on damning evidence. A tiny speck of Livye's blood was found on the pants Matthew wore at the scene, a critical link placing him there during her final moments. "It's irrefutable," McDonough, the lead investigator, said. "It ties him directly to the moment she was killed." Matthew's attorney, Rob Hughes, tried to sow doubt. "DNA can transfer from touch," he argued, attempting to downplay the significance of the blood evidence. But the state pushed back hard. How else would her blood end up on his pants unless he was there when it happened? McDonough asked. Other distractions, questions about unidentified DNA, or how long the blood had been there, fell flat against the mountain of evidence. From the venomous text messages to Livye's phone and keys found in Matthew's possession, each piece told the same story. Matthew Edgar was there, and Livye never stood a chance. The case against Matthew Edgar was already chilling, but the trial's twists made it unforgettable. Defense attorney Rob Hughes knew he faced an uphill battle. Though other people's DNA was found on Matthew, Livye's DNA was notably absent from those samples, a fact Hughes clung to as he argued for reasonable doubt. Yet even Hughes admitted the damning text messages were nearly impossible to overcome. Matthew's defense hinged on a bizarre claim. He didn't remember sending the texts. Have you ever had a client who was fully functioning during a crime, texting, driving, speaking, and then claimed total memory loss? Hughes was asked. His reply was blunt. "I have not." The questioner pressed, "And you understand why that's hard for people to believe?" Hughes nodded, knowing the jury would likely feel the same. To make matters worse, while the murder weapon hadn't been tested for fingerprints or DNA, Hughes had to concede the rifle belonged to Matthew. Every piece of evidence, every argument, painted a grim picture. But no one could predict what would happen next. The second day of testimony ended with the prosecution preparing to rest its case. Hughes was ready to present his witnesses the next morning, but the call came before dawn. Matthew's mother's voice shook with panic. "Matthew's gone," she told Hughes. "He ran. He took a gun. I'm afraid he's going to kill himself." Hughes was stunned. "Are you serious? He shouldn't have even been out on bond." Matthew had outmaneuvered the system. Wearing an ankle monitor, he waited for its battery to die and slipped away, vanishing into the woods. A massive manhunt ensued. Local law enforcement, SWAT, Texas Rangers, and prison tracking dogs scoured the area, following a trail through dense woods. Meanwhile, the trial pressed on without him. The jury wasn't told of his escape, but the empty chair spoke volumes. For Hughes, the trial was no longer difficult, it was unwinnable. A case that was already hard for the defense had become, frankly, impossible, he later admitted. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict, guilty of murder. But Matthew Edgar, now an armed fugitive, was still out there. For Livye's mother, Darcy, the days that followed were a nightmare. "It was terrifying," she said. "He knew where we lived. He killed my daughter. What would stop him from coming after me?" Convinced that not enough was being done, Darcy took matters into her own hands. She plastered homemade wanted posters across town, determined to keep Matthew's face in the public eye. She wasn't alone in her pursuit. Investigator J.P. McDonough and Jeff Coulter, a U.S. Marshals Service deputy, joined the hunt. "Did you see him as a dangerous fugitive from the start?" McDonough was asked. His response was immediate. "Oh, absolutely. Based on the crime scene and everything I knew, there was no doubt." And so the search intensified. Every passing day heightened the tension, as Livye's family and the community braced for what might come next. Matthew Edgar's flight wasn't just an escape. It was a taunt, a reminder of the justice that still hung in the balance. This is the spot, the exact place where 19-year-old Livye Lewis was brutally murdered. Now it's a memorial, carefully maintained by her mother, Darcy. I just want everyone to remember what happened here, Darcy says, her voice steady but raw. What Livy had to go through. As she tends to the flowers, her heart aches with a mother's knowing. She's convinced Matthew Edgar came back to this spot after escaping. I felt it. As a mother, I just knew he was close. Rumors spread about Matthew's mother, Cindy, buying large quantities of cigarettes and liquor, and Darcy couldn't shake the thought. Where was she taking them? The pieces didn't add up, and Darcy's suspicion grew stronger. 1 week after Matthew fled, the U.S. Marshals finally took control of the search. Special Deputy Jeff Coulter wasn't interested in Matthew's family. He'd already heard their absurd story about a drug cartel being involved. I wasn't going to waste my time with that, Coulter said bluntly. For nearly a year, Coulter worked tirelessly with the sheriff's office, chasing every lead, putting in late nights and endless weekends. Then one night, a tip came through. Matthew might be hiding just yards from his grandparents' property, in a house owned by a family friend. Coulter knew it sounded promising, but it wasn't enough. We had to see him, Coulter explained. We needed eyes on him before we could move. The team moved under the cover of darkness, using night vision to get as close as possible. They crept through the woods, but a Rottweiler's bark shattered the silence. Voices, a male and female, reached their ears, but thick brush hid their view. For over an hour, they remained stuck. Then the storm hit. Lightning, thunder, torrential rain. It was miserable, Coulter recalls. But in that chaos, something unexpected happened. The noise covered our movement. By 8 p.m., the storm still raged, but they could hear voices on the porch. Suddenly, a man stepped into view. Coulter's team froze. One of the officers whispered, "I got eyes on him." The team rushed forward, shouting, "Law enforcement! Police! Sheriff's office! Come out with your hands up." Matthew was caught off guard, pressing himself against the wall. "Oh crap, you got me," he muttered. But it wasn't over. "You haven't proven my innocence yet?" he asked, his eyes meeting Coulter's. "No, Matthew, I have not," came the reply. Matthew's desperation filled the air. "Please don't shoot my mother," he begged, before calling for Cindy to come out of the house. Coulter recalled, she didn't seem upset. She looked amazed, like she had no idea what was happening. Cindy wasn't arrested that night, but soon after, she was charged with hindering apprehension. Matthew Edgar was finally captured, but it wasn't over for Livy's family. On January 3, 2023, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison, eligible for parole after 30 years. Darcy reflects on the sentence but admits, "I don't know what peace is anymore. But he will suffer. And maybe that's enough." Yet, she knows it will never bring Livy back. "I hope he suffers," she says, her voice trembling. "But I also know he doesn't suffer like her brother. Or like her little sister." Darcy's resolve is unyielding. "I'll be there when he comes up for parole," she vows, joined by Livy's friends, Taylor and Bailey. "No matter what he says, I'll be there," Taylor insists. "I don't care how he changes in prison. She's never coming back." Meanwhile, Darcy struggles to save enough money to buy Livy a headstone. "How do you keep going, honoring your daughter's memory?" she's asked. "I just have to get up every morning and remember the good things," Darcy answers, the weight of loss in her words. "I want to make her proud. I don't want her to be remembered as the girl who was killed. I want her remembered for the way she lived and for the happiness she brought."
For those who stayed till the end, thank you for honoring Livy's story. This is Darkly Wired, where we uncover the untold stories of tragedy, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that deserve to be remembered. Together, we keep their memories alive. See you in the next one. Bye for now.